The night the Alpha King made his announcement, the wind stopped. That was the detail Seraphine Calloway remembered most clearly, years later. Not the cold, not the crowd, not the sound of her own heartbeat going quiet in her chest. She remembered that the wind simply stopped, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She had been standing in the center of the Silver Crest courtyard, surrounded by wolves who had known her since she was a child, warriors she had trained beside, elders who had watched her grow. She stood among them, and not one of them met her eyes. King Alaric Voss stood on the stone steps above her, tall and still, wearing the silver crown of the Northern Pax like it had been made for him, and in many ways, it had. He was the Alpha King, ruler of every wolf pack in the Northern Territories. His word was law, his decisions were final. His silence, when he chose it, was more powerful than any speech. He chose silence for a long time that night. Then he spoke 5 words that changed everything. She is no longer welcome. That was all. No reason, no explanation, no look in her direction. Just 5 words, delivered to the crowd, and suddenly 2 guards were stepping toward Seraphine, with expressions carved from stone. She did not fight them. She did not beg. She walked out of the gates of Silvercrest with her head up and her hands steady, and she kept walking until the torchlight behind her disappeared and the only light left was the moon. She walked for 4 days. She had no money. She had no bag. She had a pair of boots that were not made for long travel, and a wool coat that was not warm enough for the cold that crept in off the mountains after midnight. She ate berries she recognized from childhood foraging lessons. She drank from streams. She kept moving south, toward the human borderlands, because south was the only direction that felt possible. Going back was not an option. Going east or west would take her through other packs who would recognize the fading mark on her neck and send her back to Alaric, out of loyalty or fear. So she walked south. On the 4th night, her legs gave out. She did not collapse dramatically. She simply sat down on a patch of frozen ground near the base of a pine tree, leaned her back against the bark, and closed her eyes. She was not ready to stop, but her body had made the decision without her. She was exhausted in the kind of way that goes deeper than tired, the kind that reaches the place inside a person where they keep all the things they refuse to feel. She let herself feel them, just for a moment. Then she heard footsteps. They were careful footsteps, which told her the person making them was trained. A casual walker does not step that lightly on frozen ground. She opened her eyes and saw 3 wolves in dark traveling cloaks, standing a short distance away, watching her with the calm, focused attention of people who had been watching for a while. The one in front was a woman, maybe 40, with gray streaks in her dark hair and an expression that gave nothing away. "You're in Ironvale territory," the woman said. Seraphine looked around. She had not known she had crossed a border. "I did not mean to trespass. You're not being accused of anything." The woman stepped closer and crouched down to Seraphine's eye level in a way that felt respectful rather than threatening. "You're wearing a severed mark. You've been walking for days. You're cold, and you need food." She paused. "Our king has a rule. No exiled wolf dies on his border." Seraphine wanted to say something proud and independent. Instead, she passed out. She woke up in a warm room with clean blankets and a fire burning steadily across from her bed. A bowl of soup sat on the table beside her, still steaming. Through the window, she could see the walls of a city she did not recognize. Stone buildings, quiet streets, torches burning at even intervals. It looked orderly. It looked like a place where things worked the way they were supposed to. This was Ironvale. She had heard of it, the way everyone in the Northern Pax had heard of it, as a rumor, a cautionary tale, a kingdom that had pulled itself out of Alaric's union 6 years ago, under the leadership of a king nobody could quite agree on. Some said Caspian Drave was dangerous. Some said he was brilliant. Some said both things in the same breath, which was usually the most honest answer. She met him on her 3rd day of recovery. He walked into the room without knocking, which annoyed her immediately. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with dark eyes and the kind of face that was not easy to read. He was not wearing anything that marked him as a king. No crown, no formal coat, just plain clothes and boots that had clearly seen real use. He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down in the chair across from the bed, as if he had been invited. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," she said carefully. "Good." He leaned back. "I read the scout's report. You're Seraphine Calloway. You were Alaric's fated mate until 4 days ago, when he publicly ended the bond and sent you out. He said it plainly, without drama, the way someone states facts they have already made peace with. You don't have to explain anything to me, but I want to be honest with you about one thing." She waited. "You can stay in Ironvale for as long as you need," he said. "No conditions. No debt. My border rule is not charity. It's policy. But you are welcome here as a person, not just as someone who needed rescuing." She studied him. "Why?" "Because that's how a kingdom should work," he said simply. Then he stood up, nodded once, and left. It was not the most remarkable conversation she had ever had, but something about it settled into her chest and stayed there. She decided to stay. 10 weeks later, she told Caspian she was expecting a child. She told him herself, directly, before the news could travel through the household staff or reach him secondhand. She walked into his council room, waited for the 2 advisors to leave, and said it clearly. She was carrying Alaric's child. The child was coming whether anyone was ready or not, and she was not asking for anything, except to know whether this changed her standing in Ironvale. Caspian was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It changes nothing. You stay, the child stays. No one from Silvercrest touches either of you while you are in my kingdom." She searched his face for something hidden behind the words, a calculation, a plan, an angle she was not seeing. She found nothing except what appeared to be a straightforward decision made by a man who meant what he said. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. Her daughter was born on a night in early spring, when the snow was finally melting and the first green things were coming up through the mud. Seraphine named her Lyra, a name that meant nothing in particular except that it was hers to give, and giving it felt like the first truly free choice she had made in years. Lyra came into the world with dark hair and silver eyes. Silver eyes were unusual. They appeared, according to the old records that the pack scholars kept, in bloodlines that carried something old and significant. Most wolves saw them and said nothing, because saying something would require knowing the history, and most people preferred not to know the history if the history was complicated. Caspian held Lyra once, on the night she was born. He stood at the side of the room with the baby wrapped carefully in his arms, and he looked at her with an expression that Seraphine could not name. It was not the way a person looks at something new. It was the way a person looks at something they have been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting. He handed her back without a word and left quietly. Seraphine filed the moment away. 7 years passed. She built a life inside Ironvale that surprised her with how solid it became. She started as a guest, then became a resident, then earned a position in the kingdom's border intelligence work, first as an analyst, then as a senior advisor, then as the head of border intelligence, which meant she was responsible for knowing what happened at every edge of Ironvale's territory before it became a problem. She was good at it. She was good at reading patterns, at seeing the thing behind the thing, at asking the question nobody else thought to ask. Caspian valued that. He did not flatter her about it. He simply gave her the resources she needed, and trusted her to use them well, which was more valuable than any compliment. Lyra grew. She was a serious child, not in a sad way, but in the way of someone who is always thinking. She observed things carefully. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she had a habit of pointing out something nobody else had noticed, stated with the calm confidence of someone who assumed the observation was obvious, and was mildly puzzled that others had missed it. Caspian spent time with her, not in a formal, deliberate way, not scheduled lessons or structured sessions. He simply included her. If he was reviewing a map, Lyra was allowed to look. If he was meeting with a council member and the topic was not sensitive, she could sit quietly in the corner. He answered her questions fully, without talking down to her, and when she asked things he did not know the answer to, he said so, which she seemed to respect. The people of Ironvale whispered about it, not unkindly, just curiously. Why did the Iron King spend so much time with the exile's daughter? What did he see in those silver eyes that made him patient, in ways he was not always patient with adults? Seraphine wondered the same thing. And one evening, when Lyra was 7 and asleep, and the fire in the main hall had burned low, she asked. She sat down across from Caspian and said, plainly, "What do you know about my daughter that I don't?" He did not deny that he knew something, that more than anything, told her she had been right to ask. He brought out a folder of documents, old paper, carefully preserved, organized by someone who understood the importance of what they were keeping. There was a bloodline record that went back several generations. There was a charter, handwritten, with a seal she did not recognize. And there was a letter written in a handwriting she knew immediately, because she had grown up seeing it on birthday notes and grocery lists and the small papers her mother used to leave on the kitchen table. Her mother's handwriting. The letter had been written 25 years ago. It named Seraphine, her full name, years before she had done anything worth naming, as the living heir of the original Wolf Council, a governing body that had existed before Alpha Kings, before unified rule, before Alaric's grandfather decided that one wolf should hold authority over all of them. The Wolf Council had been built on shared leadership, on the idea that no single person should carry the weight of every decision alone. Alaric's grandfather had dissolved it and installed a throne instead. But the bloodline did not dissolve. Seraphine read the letter 3 times. Then she set it down and sat very still. "He knew," she said. "He was told," Caspian said carefully. "Before the bond was ever completed, his advisors brought him the genealogy records. They told him that his fated mate carried an old claim, not to his throne, but to a kind of authority that could exist alongside it, or above it, depending on how the old laws were read. They told him a child born of that bloodline would have a legal basis to restore the Wolf Council. So he sent me away. Before a child could exist," Caspian said. "Yes." She understood then why he had held Lyra the way he had, that first night. Not because he was sentimental, because he had been waiting for years to see whether the old records were right, and then a baby with silver eyes had been placed in his arms, and the answer had been obvious. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we make sure the other packs know what they were never told." What followed was not a war. Wars are loud and fast and decided by force. What Caspian built was slower and quieter. Conversations with pack leaders, careful sharing of documents, an invitation to a council meeting that 6 minor pack leaders accepted because they trusted Caspian in ways they had quietly stopped trusting Alaric. Alaric came to Ironvale himself when he heard what was being assembled. He arrived at the gates with 30 warriors and the expression of a man who believes his presence alone should settle the matter. Seraphine met him at the border. She was not nervous. That surprised her, actually. She had expected to feel something large and difficult when she saw him again. Instead, she felt clear. She stood with her rank insignia on her collar, and her feet planted firmly, and she looked at him the way you look at a decision you made a long time ago that you no longer need to question. He looked at her. Then he looked past her at Lyra, who was standing a few steps back, watching him with calm silver eyes. He took a step forward. Seraphine moved in front of her daughter. "She has a name," Seraphine said, "and you don't know it." The council meeting that followed was formal and documented and witnessed by representatives from 7 packs. The old charter was presented. The bloodline records were presented. 3 elders who had been alive when the Wolf Council was dissolved confirmed that the documents were real. Alaric argued. He questioned the records. He questioned Caspian's motives. He questioned everything he could think of, because he was a man who had built his authority on a version of history that left out important pieces, and now the missing pieces were laid out on the table in front of everyone. He did not lose his crown. No one took it from him, but 6 packs voted to formally recognize the old Wolf Council charter as still legally binding, which meant that a governing body existed beside his throne, one he could not dissolve, one with its own authority and its own seat. That seat belonged to Seraphine, held in trust until Lyra came of age. On the evening after the vote, Seraphine stood at the window of her room in Ironvale and watched her daughter run across the fields below in the last light of the day. Lyra was laughing at something, chasing a bird, or maybe just running for the pleasure of it. Her silver eyes caught the evening glow, and she looked entirely like herself, serious and bright, and completely unaware of how much had already changed because she existed. Caspian came to stand beside Seraphine at the window. "She's going to change everything," Seraphine said quietly. "She already has," he answered. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The sun finished setting. The first stars appeared. Somewhere in the fields, Lyra's laughter drifted up on the breeze, light and easy, the sound of a child who had grown up in a place where she was safe, and wanted, and known. It was, Seraphine thought, exactly what she had walked 4 days through the cold to find, even if she had not known it at the time. Some things find you only after you have been brave enough to lose everything else first.